Actually, it makes me very happy that obviously I do not. So let me just recall you that we are here to give you information on the sector in which you work, so that you can do your work very well. I also have a couple of other things to say. They're actually all on the screen and I will be short. But one which is very important is that we have a big anniversary this year. The observatory turns 25 years and we have given ourselves also a gift in terms of a new graphic identity. So if you don't see us under our old logo anymore, that is why. But we're still there, as lively and as much kicking as ever. So because we have an anniversary, we got a gift for you, which you should have received in the form of a USB stick. It's very small, but it's actually explosive. It has lots of information on it. Also information from one of our members, namely Portugal, represented by the ICA, the Film Institute, who did help us to give you this little gift and also have some of their information on it. Our gift for the birthday is obviously here, your presence, being so numerous. This is really wonderful. It's very motivating for us. Now, what will happen today, we will have on a quite important topic, the on-demand and its impact on the film. We have a very energetically moderated debate, energetically moderated by Michael Gobbins, who is the chairman of the Film Agency for Wales and also partner at Sampo Media. So thank you for having agreed to do that, Mike. He will also introduce all the other good people who will speak, so I can be short. I just want to underline that we follow a little bit our usual way of celebrating these conferences and of also taking really good charge of our own role in that by fueling the discussions with two little kick-off snapshots that colleagues of mine will give to you. Now, we expect from you that there are then some comments and contributions from the floor. There are obviously a lot of hot topics, even hot potatoes, and it seems like if there's nothing else anymore, you still have Netflix, right? Now, last thing from the slide, I'm almost done, the hashtag. You've seen the room is full, there are still people outside and maybe there are also still people at home. If you want them to participate in today's event, please tell them what's going on. Feel free to Twitter as much as you can. And then a very last, well, caretaking note, and that very much in the interest of our kind hosts. The Cannes Film Market has made it possible again that we have this biggest room in Cannes for our conference, but that comes, of course, with something attached to it, and there again I have to have your help. It's very important that you clear out this room immediately when the conference stops. If not, we won't have it again next year. It's serious, they need to go on with their screenings, so I count on your help. And that does not mean that we shouldn't continue our discussions. We should. The observatory has a booth. It's number 18.02. We welcome you at any time. It's always meant. And we also welcome wherever we can meet you. And also we welcome you if you have a chance to visit us at our home in Strasbourg in France. Thank you. Enjoy the conference.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Well, we thought in a couple of hours this morning we'd solve the problems of VoD and then we could get the hell out at great speed. Easy task. What I want to do is give you a very brief thing. So it's a very short amount of time and a very big subject. So I just want to talk about some of the things that will be in this discussion but won't be central to this discussion about the film pie. I think a pie is a rather British thing. I think we should probably call it a film quiche, just in honour of Brexit. But I think that the idea here there are some ways in which the on-demand world is increasing the pie or is likely to make a contribution. And I just want to go through those quickly before we get on to what I think the main substance is. I think in the converged film economy that we now live in. I think that the reality is that the growth of TV, the growth of drama, the fact that on-demand platforms are emerging which put drama at their very centre may increase the opportunities for actors, for talent, for distribution, and for companies that I think will look to diversify. That may come into the overall discussion. I think Will Smith was rather unfairly booed for the point he was making. Why did boo in Cannes? There's no one even there watching it. Why can't you be like the British and just be passive-aggressive? Keep this in and get really depressed for the rest of your life and angry and bitter. But what Will Smith was saying is, look, in a on-demand platform, a subscription platform, there are opportunities here for discovery. That's an argument they're making, that there may be kids who had no idea they wanted to watch a European film and may come across it because they were there for different reasons. The quality issue is one, again, that I think is tangential to this, but it's worth having in. You know, the fact is, booed or not, there are a couple of films here in competition. I think last year Ted Hope was up here from Amazon Prime, and you know, you look at what Amazon has produced in terms of films. Clearly, there is an investment there, which goes beyond the reason why we're really interested in that part of the world, which is when big Americans come with full wallets, we're always going to sit up and take notice, particularly when we're in a difficult situation we are now. It's not big cigars anymore, it's big data, but it's the same thing. And lastly, I think there's one thing I want you to have in your head, which is the counterfactual side of this is, if this world doesn't grow, if VOD isn't going to grow the pie, exactly what would the world be looking like? So I want that counterfactual idea in your head. What would the realities be if there was no on-demand platforms coming in? I think the assumption that everything might be wonderful and stay as it is will inform the discussion. But what we're going to talk about today is really gets down to the hard realities of the economics of this, which is how big will that pie be? How big might that industry be? We used to talk a lot about tipping points, that there would be a point where the fall off from DVD and TV would move into VOD. So in our imagination, there is a correct size for the film industry. I think that question is one that we have to ask ourselves, because really we've been talking about a 25-year period where we had DVD and television in the market. That's not necessarily the natural size of the industry. So the size of that total pie is still a big deal for discussion. But what you really want to know, most of the people in this room, is what's my slice of that pie. That's what we really want to know, is what's in it for me here. Is my film, is my content, is my work actually going to be able to make a difference? And in Europe, our concern, obviously, is being squeezed out. The fear that somehow the on-demand channels might leave us with nothing. So we're going to explore all of these themes as we go on. I'm going to introduce the panel in a second, but I think first it's good to have some context in where we're at the moment in terms of the realities of the economics and the share that VOD currently has of an ecosystem. And keep that idea lastly in your head of the ecosystem, because when we say, can it grow the pie, I think the other question that's in everyone's heads is, at whose expense? Is it the case that we might do very well at VOD over here to some extent, but at the expense of theatrical or at the expense of something else? So that's the discussion. So I'm going to start first by giving you some numbers with Gilles Fontaine, who's the head of Department for Market Information at the Observatory, who will give us a snapshot.
Thank you, Michael. Just a small warning, this is a presentation with a lot of figures. You will find most of the figures in one of the leaflets which have been distributed at the entrance, so do not panic if you get all my numbers, you will get a second chance. I will try to start discussing basically definition. What do we mean exactly by video on demand? Because our point is that we are talking about very different market segments, and maybe not only variants of the same markets, but different market segments. Three main categories of on-demand services. To start with, on the right side of the slide, free on-demand services, basically anything from catch-up television services to video sharing platforms. on these basically no or almost no films. So I will now concentrate on the pay part of the on-demand services, the TVOD and the SVOD services. So transactional VOD, iTunes-like services on the one side, subscription video on-demand services, Netflix-like on the other side. And my point is that there are very two different services and markets and proposals to the consumer. As regards Windows, for example, for transactional VOD, we are talking about early release windows, whereas for subscription, we are normally talking about later release windows. Of course, on transactional VOD, we are talking about transaction on an individual film, whereas on subscription VOD, it's a proposal of a package of film and TV series to the consumer. The business model for films is different also, rather a revenue sharing model as regard transactional VOD, rather a flat fee model as regard subscription VOD. And finally, and maybe the most important, these two market segments do not grow at all at the same pace. Transactional VOD seems to be already maturing, and I will give you some figure on that, where in Europe, subscription VOD continues to grow very fast. So, not surprisingly, transactional VOD, again, iTunes-like service, compete or substitute or replacement to DVD. But when we talk about subscription VOD, my point is that we are probably closer to the pay TV market than to the on-demand market as such. Let's look a little bit at figures, and first at this transactional part of the market, I mean transactional VOD and DVD, again, where you do have an individual transaction for an individual film. Two messages here. The growth first, transactional VOD remains still small in comparison with DVD. So this is an average in Europe, but still DVD weight is larger than transactional VOD. And the other key message is that the combination of the two, DVD plus transactional VOD, is constantly decreasing, meaning that transactional VOD is not compensating for the decrease in DVD. Let's look at now the other part of the market, subscription VOD, and compare it with pay TV, because again, our opinion is that subscription VOD rather belongs to the pay TV ecosystem. Here on the one side, first lesson, subscription VOD compared to pay TV remains still small, but the combined market of pay TV and subscription VOD is still growing. Pay TV is growing and subscription VOD is growing. And last part of this first set of figures, let's now have a look at the global audiovisual market, all sources of revenue included, from television services, from cinemas, from DVD, and from on-demand. Again, the share of on-demand was, because these are 2015 figures, still relatively small. We are talking about, in Europe, 3% of the total market, so still pretty small. And SVOD being clearly the main share of this on-demand market, and clearly the segment which is by far growing the faster. I would like to bring back with a little bit more details cinema in the discussion, and to focus again on this particular segment when there are transactions on films, where you do not subscribe to a service, where you do not watch TV, but where the consumer, the user, does a choice to rent or to purchase a film. So I would like to focus on DVD, cinemas, and transactional VOD, because again, here we have a transaction to rent or to buy a film. What's interesting to see is that until 2014, these cumulative transactions were rather decreasing, meaning that as a consequence of the fact that VoD was not compensating for the decrease in DVD, this total market for transaction was rather decreasing. We had some kind of first trend reversal in 2015. But what's maybe even more interesting is that as DVD is decreasing, as VoD is not compensating, it means that in average, the share of box office revenue tends to increase over the last year. Again, because VoD is not compensating for DVD, meaning that the share of box office is increasing. So we have a question here, is cinema and theatrical exploitation becoming more important? So my take on this subject is, yes, cinema may be more important as far as transactional films are concerned, but still this is only true in statistics as an average, and we know that averages always lie. Because the reality that, as regards cinema, we have an increasingly high number of theatrical releases, we have windows in cinemas which are short running, and we do have an high box office concentration. So maybe the average share of cinemas may be growing, but it's not growing, of course, for all films. So that leads to the following conclusion, that for some films, indeed, because the access or the exposure of film in cinema may be not as efficient as possible, VoD may increase the revenue pie for some of the films. But do European films actually make it to VoD? Are they actually available on VoD? This is the first set of figures. We took all films which have been produced and released in Europe over the last 10 years, and we looked if we could find them in transactional VoD. That's something we did last year. And the result was pretty straightforward. We found that less than 50% of the films, of the European films produced and released in Europe were available in VoD, whereas 87% of the US film were available in VoD. So only a portion of the European films released in cinema were actually available on VoD. We also looked at a smaller sample of films. We call it export films, or films which travels and which have been recently released. And we came to a pretty similar conclusion. Still, a higher proportion of the films released in cinemas were available on VoD. But they were available in a very limited number of countries, or in a smaller number of countries than they were made available in cinemas. This film, who did travel to some extent in Europe, were released in 10 different countries in Europe in cinema. But they were only released in transactional VoD in 6 countries. Meaning that for those films that circulate, they still circulate better in cinemas, but they do circulate in VoD. And my final point will be about the interconnection between the theatrical and the VoD releases. In other words, were the film released in cinemas and released in VoD in the same countries or in different countries. So again, we took a sample of 8,000 national releases, and we tried to look whether the films had been released only in cinemas, only in VoD, or both in cinema and on VoD. And we came to 3 main findings. First one, that in one given country, a theatrical release does not guarantee a VoD release. In many cases, a release in cinema is not followed by a release in VoD. However, for this film, for those films who have been released in transactional VOD, in 75% of cases, there was a cinema release before. And the third conclusion we drew from these figures was that there is an emerging pattern of straight to VOD, and I mean straight to VOD in a certain country, meaning the release of a film in a country in TVOD, in TVOD without a prior release in cinema. So that's my final take for this presentation. There is, to some degree, an interrelation, an interconnection between theatrical and VOD release, but it's not an absolute rule. You can go to cinema and not go to TVOD, and you can, in less cases, go to TVOD without, in a country, having been in the cinema. And that's it for my presentation. I give the floor back to you, Michael.
Okay, we're going to pack a lot in here, a lot of information there, and what's clear and really important straight away is that the term on demand is something that we use in general, in a very general way, but we're talking about a number of different things, and I think it was very useful to have that relationship made between the difference between a transactional VOD where you're paying for something specific and an SVOD subscription one where you're paying for a subscription for lots of things rather than the specifics. I think you raised the idea of demand coming in there, that actually the way that audiences are now demanding may be changing. And I think in general, you moved it away to an extent from the idea that we're only talking about Netflix and Amazon here. We're going to explore all of those here with a really strong panel. I think of Marco Kiemens of Catley and also the president of the European Producers Club. We have Wendy Bernfeld, who's one of the experts we often go back to in terms of studying this field from Right Stuff. We have, at the end there, we have Jaime Rapale from Filmin, one of those European on-demand channels which I think have emerged and grown in recent years. We have Tina Clint from Level K, and Level K's company that I think is following a pattern we're going to see more and more, which is a sales company that's also working very strongly in the aggregation business, and we'll talk about aggregation as we kind of go on. And then we have Mark Schmidt from Cinear, obviously here a very well-known distributor in Benelux countries, but again, someone working in the aggregation business too. Let's explore this first with Marco. Let's come to you. We heard a characterization there of those different patterns of those different kinds of channels. I think it's really important we nail the difference here when we're talking about the film pie in terms of revenues, us as businesses and the potential in terms of those understanding the differences between those areas. Maybe you could talk us through your characterization of the difference between subscription, transaction, etc.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. Thank you for inviting me, first of all. Great turnout. I think we may need a little bit of air conditioning, if this is possible. Unless half the audience stops breathing at some point. Yeah, it's, we talked a little bit on the phone. I really think that the general partition is correct. Meaning transactional video on demand is replacing DVD, and subscription video on demand is predominantly moving in the area of pay TV. However, I think this is the kind of a first correct but simplified approach. Because in a way what is happening is that OTTs and the subscription video demand are radically changing the model. When we spoke on the phone, and I'm trying to phrase it correctly, I don't want to say something that sounds stupid, but I think that a large portion of the audience have already a habit of consuming what they want, when they want, wherever they want, as they say. And that model or that habit was created by piracy. Piracy is exactly that. I mean, you can Google a title, and Google, unfortunately, will give you in their first page, will direct you to the illegal streaming site, instead of putting them in the second or third page, which they could, but they refused to, bearing a large part of responsibility in the piracy. So then you click, and in most instances you can watch a series or a film. So I guess a large portion of the audience was ready for it already. And you see, even I have a kid that the other day was a 7-year-old kid who was complaining loud about something, I didn't know what it was, and then she was basically asking kind of in her own words, a sophisticated question about Windows and exploitation rights, because she was very annoyed by the fact that she could not find on pay TV what she wanted when she wanted. You know, she didn't understand why she could not have something. So obviously the audience is getting there. And subscription video on demand is a model that is becoming dominant because it really fits with what the audience wants.
Right, okay, this is really important here. I think the idea that subscription might be demand-driven and that drive may have come from somewhere else makes, in some ways, I think you're saying TVOD is relatively simple. TVOD will grow or it won't grow, but it's very much a replacement for DVD. You buy an individual film just like you did before. Subscription is interesting, you make the link to piracy, but that's a different thing, that's a different beast. And you are not paying for an individual film there, you're paying for the sense that the audience has of wanting what they want, when they want. I just want to ask you one thing, because in a way, Netflix and Amazon, we're not going to use those terms too much when I'll come to Wendy in a moment, is when you look at them, they're also trying to build that demand as well. You can't get what you want on Netflix. So what they're doing is creating something for themselves. They're creating their own business. They're not in the business of pie growing. They're in the business of Netflix, or they're in the business of Amazon. And as far as films are concerned, from a market perspective, you are selling what, for them, they buy what they think is going to increase their subscription numbers. The individual films, the individual positions of those films is not their primary concern, and that seems to me it makes them a different kind of economic beast too.
Well, I don't know. I think it varies depending on territories and countries. So I think that as far as Italy is concerned, I think that the OTT are actually going to contribute to the growing of the pie quite substantially, because the market, the DVD market, has gone down, down, down. And I remember, when I started in this business almost 30 years ago, I would go to Korea and sell DVD rights for Italian language soaps. And after a while, it did not happen anymore. And then after several years, the DVD market just died in Korea recently because of the widespread availability of Wi-Fi, very fast connection, and you have a constant evolution that you're seeing here too. So I think that Netflix, as far as Italy is concerned, but many other territories, with a different combination of buying libraries or buying films in a slot that was typically allocated for pay TV rights, or in some cases, financing the whole thing and buying global rights, are actually contributing, because the DVD market has gone down and the transactional video on demand has not replaced it in terms of numbers. So now we have a new entity. I'm saying Netflix, but actually soon Amazon, and in a lot of cases, local, often telcos, that they set up their own video on demand or subscription video on demand operation.
We'll come back to that in the second part of this, because the first part we're really looking at the market now, and in the second part I think we're looking forward. I want to hold that thought on as far as the growth of the market and the potential for new players coming in, I think is a really important part for the second session here. Wendy, if we could come to you, just from the fragmentation we're talking about, maybe you could give us a bit more, when you look at Europe, give us a bit more of a sense of the way different territories are working and the way that different places, different platforms are working.
Yes, what I found interesting, even since the statistics of 2015 that were on the screen, is the past year and the coming year are very focused on sub-niches. So there's the SVOD big players like a Netflix and Amazon, the big five, but each region now, generally speaking, even in Central Europe or developing countries, has a local strong player or two, plus telecom and cable right now in SVOD. And aside from it, there are specific niches like kids only for $3.99, docs only for $3.99, anime, and what that's driving is consumers' ability to go into an SVOD that's a genre-specific thing, documentaries like Curio, Curiosity Stream. So what that's done is, from a consumer point of view, it's allowed consumers to get more of what they want without having to know the individual name of an individual filmmaker. They get a monthly subscription and can discover. But also, from a distributor or producer's point of view, it's given more buyers competing against each other. Rarely are these deals exclusive, which is something we all forget. Most of the, you read in the press about the exclusives, but most of the time SVOD is non-exclusive and there's first and second window. So if you multiply that in each country in Europe by, TVOD, then SVOD 1, SVOD 2, plus thematic, it's allowing, after the first year of hellish work, it's allowing a lot of different revenues to come in if you're rippling through the regions and the windows. I think sometimes people just stop after one deal, and that might be something to look at in part two.
Yeah, so, when you look at those, what you're saying is it's a more mixed market than we might think, depending on where you are, that there are local TV catch-up, there's the specialists, and there are these big SVOD players and TVOD players. What I'm interested in, and I think a lot of people here are interested in, is well, what I want to know is the money, where the finance is going, because when you hear a non-exclusive deal for a specialist European VoD platform, what are we talking in terms of money? Are we talking about something that might ever reach the levels that we saw with DVD, for example?
Well, each deal is really bespoke, and what's good about that is that it's very timing specific to the platform and how competitive it is at that minute in the market. So, for example, in Holland, there might have been 2 years ago SVOD deals for old library that were 4 figures for a non-exclusive license, and then 6 months later they become 6 and 7. It's timing, it's who else are they competing with, how are they positioning, and so the money has honestly ranged from as low as, say, 500 euros a film for a really old library in a non-exclusive context, to 6 and 7 figure deals for foreign language, non-English, Croatian, Dutch, Israeli movies that happen to hit a sweet spot. And I think specifically on the money, we found the playing off against pay TV, traditional pay, versus the SVODs, is sometimes the non-exclusive offer in one SVOD non-exclusive is cheaper, but if you're then doing 3 sales in the same country in SVOD, you've actually exceeded the price of the traditional incumbent in pay TV. An example, if it's 40,000 euros for a film in, I'm making this up, in Holland on pay TV, then you might have a 10,000 euro offer, but if you have a couple of sales, you've suddenly decided it's better or worse to go to the non-exclusive SVODs. From a rights holder point of view, it's just giving ability to play off and to quantify the value instead of just the only game in town, here's your price, take it or leave it. And I think that's the interesting angle for all of us.
We'll talk about how this market develops. I'll come to Mark on this, but I think when what you're saying is there are people who are doing good things. I think when we saw earlier on some films do well, we all are looking for those big numbers that go around the Netflix and Amazon deals that we see here. What you're saying is that in a mixed market, people are actually doing deals in some countries which are actually quite strong. They're something which is reliable and sustainable.
Well, specific examples, we always should look at who's next rather than who you're reading about today. And the larger players like Sky, who are currently in Italy, Germany, and the UK, are interested in moving to other regions, but you won't always see that until after 6 months of rights buying. Same with Viasat or MTG, who are multi-region.
Right.
You know, a lot of these players are expanding, and they're also commissioning originals, not just buying library. Not every day, but they're more European and more interested in European taste.
Okay, you're throwing one thing in the market I think is really important here, is the level of transparency and data here. And the level, you used to be able to rely, you understood this market, there were ways that you could work these things out. You are pointing to a reality, which is the information that's coming back, the knowledge of what a fair price is, what a deal is, that's still in flux. And you may see some good deals somewhere, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything for the overall market in some countries.
Right.
Okay, that's good. Mark, you're in the distribution business, so first of all, that characterisation, there are already opportunities, and some people are learning how to navigate this relatively successfully. Maybe you could give us your sense of this, the emerging market.
Yes. Is it on?
Yeah.
I think the figures presented by Gilles were very interesting. I think as always, averages are averages. If you take the Dutch market and maybe to a lesser extent the Belgian market, you see that the decline in DVD has been much more brutal. You also see that the TVOD market has been, you showed growing at 19% over the period. In the last 3 years, it's been, up, down, and therefore a bit flat. Piracy is a big thing. So in a way, if I take the Dutch market, and to Wendy what she was also saying, is that you see that market is already evolving a lot. So you can't really rely that much more on free or paid TV. It's becoming, certainly, for English-speaking titles, it's always a different story, but you can't rely on them. So what you see is an explosion in the number of little deals you can do, and it's a period of flux. And I think to your point in the beginning about talking about your quiche or your pie or whatever, the thing is now is, if you look at the spectrum from content to users, we had a very sequential and kind of, linear value chain with different people doing different things at different times. But I think with the arrival of the bigger export players, you may have a new quiche that is, will be there. And I think we are now, I talk about the Netherlands, in a period of real transition. So from stable pay TV output deal that we had, now we are doing a mosaic of smaller deals. So it's an interesting period.
Yeah, I mean, mosaics are obviously more complex and difficult to deal with than those kind of linear deals now. I just wonder, in terms of, it makes, or does it make the job of distributors more unreliable now? It becomes less easy to predict the way things are going to work when you've got an individual release. Is it less stable, the market right now? Or is that mosaic beginning to emerge into a really clear pattern?
At this moment, it's not entirely clear where it's going, because if I listen to some of the colleagues in the UK, for example, I think that they're, for some of them, I'm not talking for the entire market, but some of the discussion I had, they say that the competition between Sky, Amazon, and Netflix is proving, good for the distributors. At this stage, if I talk from our experience at CNA, we are getting to terms with that combination between exclusive and non-exclusive, because in a way, everything was non-exclusive except pay TV, and there was one or two pay TV players, so that's easy to understand. You choose, or you have a good deal with one. And now you're getting into a world where the length of the window, is it exclusive, non-exclusive, are becoming issues or discussions in every single deal. So a telco will say, I'd like, 6 weeks, like this exclusive, and then I'll do 12 months this. So you're seeing like a very, a lot of, we have a lot of work in a way to kind of always value these things. So that's one thing. And then to the other point, which comes a lot also in your presentation, Gilles, it's the thing about why are, some of the films are in the cinemas and then they're not on a VoD platform. We we serve as a company about 20 VoD platforms across the Benelux. But the thing is that the VOD platforms are also becoming, not only is it exclusive, non-exclusive, but it's also choice versus not choice. So, some of the platforms that we're dealing with are starting to say we will do less than more, because by, doing less we can focus on the strongest titles or whatever, which, the platforms, they need to manage their own businesses, so I'm not there to criticize or anything, but you can tell that, a few years ago, most titles were available, were they library or current, and now you're seeing people like focusing on less titles, and not all of them. I'm just, it's always you generalize a little bit, but I want to be careful. So that the dynamic between more or less and exclusive and non-exclusive, and the time that you do these deals is making the equation more complex. But it's also exciting in a way. I'm not crying here, but there is definitely a period now where you go from one stage to another, and we're trying our best to make it work.
Yeah, we want no crying here, although those things vary from country to country. When do you want to?
Well, just that it'll be interesting to see the 2016 figures, because one of the things I'm noticing operationally in deals is how much ability now there is to export weird foreign languages from European or countries.
What's a weird foreign language?
Right, Dutch, Danish, right? Small countries where the language isn't like German or Spanish, which travels at least. So what is interesting is the huge take-up in these smaller regions, and the languages aren't a barrier anymore with subtitling being accepted increasingly in the SVOD sector. And what you sometimes are blocked in your own country from doing, we've been selling Dutch and Israeli films to China, for example, who was never a buyer before, other than for Chinese films and MPAA majors. So I think this next year will be very interesting for that statistic.
Yeah, I think there's a number of themes coming through, and we're going to move on to Tina in a second, but I think it's worth pointing out, I think that's really key, that what we're seeing now is the mosaic's a great image to have in people's heads, but that's where the economics is changing. The idea that exclusive and non-exclusive has now become a very big part of this kind of world. You put something else in the market, which we're going to come back to in part two, which is the competitive environment right now means that there are quite good deals in place, because some of those exclusive deals are about platforms trying to compete with other platforms. The question, I think, for the next part will be for all of us, will be what happens when that competition starts working out, because this may be the highest price that anyone ever pays, because we're at that stage where loss leaders are going in and where people are doing things. It's an interesting point. Yeah, please.
Just one more point on the basis of what you said is that what you also see with the VOD is that it's becoming something where there is a lot of interest nationally to own VOD rights for the telecom platform. I just wanted to add that to the complexity of the mosaic, is that you find a lot of Proximus or KPN or all the telcos, they sometimes, or the pay TV platform co-produce a film by owning a portion of the VOD rights. So that's people biting to the chain from that side, and again they are financing a film, so that's good. But for us as distributor, then we sometimes have rights that have gaps in them. So that's a dynamic that we need to manage. The other dynamic I wanted to say when we talk about Netflix and Amazon, if you listen to some of their numbers of having 3-4 billion both available to buy content, if you just assume that a portion of that, let's say $500 million, $1 billion, is there for film, you see that this year or next year, we'll probably reach the point where both Amazon and Netflix will represent, in a way, the buying power that many of the national distributors have in terms of financing cinema or film or whatever they'll do. And I think it's probably not like now, but it's something that is coming very, very soon. And I just wanted to add that the VOD rights are also pulled from many directions.
Can I add one sentence?
Yeah.
Similarly, it works from the other end, the window at the bottom, so to speak, free TV, because now the national public broadcasters are starting SVODs, which is making it more complicated, as well as free TV broadcasters having SVODs. And this makes, it makes it very intricate to figure out the windows and rights.
Yeah, you've also raised something else which we're going to come back to part two, which is when we talk about the film pie, a lot of these, they're having their own dynamic, a lot of these channels themselves, and increasingly we're talking at the moment about distribution rather than production, but the reality is that a lot of these SVOD platforms, you're already talking about them becoming more curatorial. What we might also be talking is about the funding of films themselves, and that's another part of the pie that we haven't really got into yet. But Tina, let's come to you. You're working in this world now with aggregation. Just some thoughts about where we're at and what's working.
We are currently an aggregator, aggregating worldwide, and we do Europe, Eastern Europe, Russia, South Africa, Australia. And
can you just explain aggregation, just for anyone who's in any doubts, just what we mean by
aggregation? We are the middleman between the platform and the rights holder. So that can be the producer, distributor, and then local platforms or major platforms visible in the local countries. And what I see working is when a local distributor promotes and exploits all digital windows throughout the whole digital life of a film. That means first after theatrical release, early EST, TVOD, in some countries still DVD, then pay TV, SVOD, that's then premium SVOD, then you have free TV, catch-up SVOD, in some countries AVOD, and in a few countries FVOD. There's still a transition period. There's still a huge lack of knowledge. We also compete for people's time. We need, it's in most cases, to do a very good release, we have a huge problem with timing. Producers have to get used to deliver the whole film package 3 months before the first theatrical release or before the first world premiere of the film in any market. So we have to run faster on lower budgets. And we, in some countries, like in Norway, there's someone in the room here where they are trying theatrical TVOD, which would also be interesting. So what we do is different strategies for different films. One thing is American independence, where you can do the whole window structure, the traditional holdbacks, where you have theatrical, 4 months from theatrical, approximately 4 months. It's EST, it's early EST. Then you have 1 to 2 weeks before you do TVOD. In some countries you do 45 days. So every country is different, and you have to make a specific detailed strategy per film or per genre. Because some films, not all films are supposed to be seen in the cinemas. We actually release most film on TVOD of the European films, but yes, some of the major local platforms do select. They don't have the capacity to do all smaller European films, but it doesn't make sense to put a film on all VOD platforms. Completely depending on the film, the target group, the YouTube generation is not going to love art house more, but just because it's available on a VOD platform. So there's a big transition period, there's a lack of knowledge, we have to get much better in detailed strategies, and we have to bring the cooperation between producers, distributors, sales agents. We have to have time-wise, the right material at the right time, and we have to run faster.
Wow, I think that really encapsulates the point here, which was in ye olde days, last year, we were in a position where we could be talking about a relatively straightforward set of transitions. You look at a theatrical release followed by a DVD release, followed or television. I mean, not followed by, but you would be working out your system with a relatively small amount of things to think about. Now, what you're doing is saying it's lots of little pieces, and you've actually got to think and learn how to work those. But you put something really big in the market, which I do want to come back to, which is you can have access to these things on these channels. And maybe when we look at the numbers of European films on these channels, those figures don't mean anything. What we want really is not access, it's really about the engagement. Does anyone want these things? So the trick, it seems to me, is what you're saying, is if we really want this thing to work and the market to grow and those numbers to go up, you've got to actually build demand for those things. Because people aren't just going to watch, they're not more likely to watch it because it's on VOD than go to an art house cinema.
Create the demand, and also for some films you do EST 2 weeks after theatrical. It's complete, and that's also in some countries to fight piracy. Because I think if the film is available and it's something that's the demand, people will pay for it. But again, if you talk about the YouTube generation, my 9-year-old son was asking me, how do I know there's a streaming commercial on television, and he's asking me, how do I know if it's illegal? And I would say, my answer to him was, first of all, you look at the logo, because that will give you an indication of who's the local distributor. If you don't figure that one out, you can check the billing block, and then you can look up their number and you can call and ask if. Because I didn't have the right explanation to him, because he doesn't know, because we have the TV apps on the Apple TV and everything is for free for him. He do understand that that EST and TVOD, so I explained to him that it comes at a later stage, but it's not because he wants to pay for what he watches, but he doesn't know when it's right or wrong.
Right, okay, you've raised a number of points we're going to come back to. I think the Windows issue here that you're raising is that may be part of the demand process, that we are talking, and this is the big thing that's come up with Netflix now, is the theory that they need to fit in a pattern where it's got a theatrical release, and then in France, 36 months later, it's going to appear on some SVOD channel. What you're saying is actually, for younger people and the way that people are demanding content, never mind the younger people, you're saying that building that demand may also be about revisiting some of those issues. But I want to come back to that because it's probably going to turn into some booing, I hope, at some point. Helma, you've got a, you're now, it's been a few years actually. How many years have you been going?
10.
10 years, good grief. Makes you feel old, doesn't it?
It was like 100.
Yeah, absolutely. Just, I mean, you've listened to the stuff. If just give us a sense of how your own platform has kind of worked. But the dream that you were very much part of was that we could create European platforms that would be able to compete somehow for what we saw coming from the outside. We saw these big players. But some of those platforms are doing pretty well, but I'm trying to work out how well and how far you are from that dream of this of the European Euro VOD system.
I'm going to talk about my local platform, which is filming with what's available in Spain and Portugal. Of course, we need to create the demand for the audience. I think everything has changed since 2015, after the arrival, at least in Spain, after the arrival of Netflix, Amazon and HBO. So basically now the VoD is flat, the VoD market is flat. It's still important for sure for the big titles, but for the small European films, like the ones that have been programmed here under Semaine de la Critique or La Canzone, they are not attractive to have a big impact on the VoD market. So SVOD is almost everything in Spain. For us, it's 75% of our core business is subscription, not transactional. This is one thing. The other thing is, for some platforms, as Mark said, less is more. For our platform, more is better. So we have 10,000 films. And the most important thing is that each week, 6,000 different films have been watched on our platform. So 6,000 films, which is quite a lot, different films. So it's important, the discoverability. So of course we rely on these new algorithm systems, but we still trust on the oldest algorithm at all, which is the human mind, which is the theatrical and local distributors, which are quite important for our platform.
Okay, that model was one that we thought, I mean, when we talked about on-demand 10 years ago, there was this dream that it would be all you can eat. You could go and whatever film was in your head, you would go there. And a lot of them, if you look at what Mubi has done now, Mubi moved towards a very small number of curated films. And that model seems to be working for them anyway. And in terms of Netflix and Amazon, it's still very much the front page stuff. So the two things here is how many people are actually seeing. I mean, 6,000 films in a world particularly where there's very strong piracy in Spain, where you've got all kinds of other stuff. Are the numbers actually looking at your 10,000 films? Is it a tiny, thin, long tail here?
Oh, let's be honest, the size of a pie in Spain is like a small muffin. So, basically, I can say it, we have paid €1 million, more than millions of euros in royalties during the last 4 years. So it's small muffin, but still matters. And about the numbers of streams, 300,000 views per month. It's a quite nice figure for art house films.
Yeah, but a lot of those films presumably are getting tiny numbers. What I'm trying to work out is when you're looking at how big this pie might get, you know, the idea of tons of lots and lots of films that build that number of European films on platforms, so that might go up. That doesn't necessarily mean that the money coming back to the content owners or the people seeing it will increase very much. So you could end up fixing the number of European films on on-demand platforms whilst having almost no economic benefits and very little actual viewing of those films.
Yeah, but I would like to let our audience to decide which films they want to see each night. For instance, if I don't know, if one guy from Seville want to watch a Truffaut film, or a Rossellini film, or a Godard film, or Susanne Bier film, this must be a platform on all of those films are available. Otherwise, they will go on the pirate sites.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting that in some ways that is your model. You are competing with the reality that piracy is such a strong thing. I just wonder whether that's specific to Spain, because in other areas you don't have that same kind of competition. And I'm not sure the all-you-can-eat volume numbers would necessarily be the model elsewhere.
Oh, of course, when it goes for Spain, maybe it won't work on our different territories.
Okay. I'm going to take another snapshot, if that's okay, but just to sum up where I think we got to on that first thing. There's a degree of optimism here, I think, in as much as there is ways of putting those mosaics together in some countries, and I think that last presentation was just gave it very clear view that Europe is not one place where everything's working just fine. It's lots of different places with lots of different approaches, different channels, different availability. And it means that the deals that content owners are doing in those is also changing. So your mosaic will change from place to place. So the total pie may go up, but actually it's still a more complex and difficult position we're in. And that balance of exclusive and non-exclusive and the different platforms in there, it seems to me you're suggesting are still quite difficult. The relationship with theatrical, I think, is something we'll probably look at in the next a bit more. But again, you've still got the security of that kind of business. Still, that seems a relatively straightforward thing. When you're moving beyond that, it still feels like a world where it's in the making, it's evolving. And this time next year, we might be having a very different discussion. And certainly in 5 years, when maybe the competitive environment has changed, we might see an entirely different conversation again. But I want to explore those in the next part, which is really about what we need to do, what that value chain, what the approaches we need to take to make it happen, to actually support those things. But we're going to move to Maya Capello, if we can, who's going to talk about some of the issues that I think are going to affect this world, the digital single market strategy, circulation of work. So Maya.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you all. It's quite impressive to stand here. My menu for today. Talk about the rules, but also try to figure out together how this value chain is developing when we are talking about distribution rights. So that's why I'm going to start with some small graphs, and I'm very happy that Tina mentioned the issue of the aggregators, because I will show them. So we will have the chance to see how we at the observatory are exploring some emerging models when it comes to the VoD distribution chain, when it comes to the rights. So if you have a look here, there is probably one person missing. We have heard about this elephant in the room, which are the pirates. I didn't put them in the graph on purpose, but maybe they are also in there in a certain stage. all these subjects, they have some relations with each other. We are talking about the producers, film agents. I've just put them together for the reason of simplification. We have national distributors, but then also the aggregators that are popping up as new, very interesting, to use Mike's word, beasts in this audiovisual ecosystem. Traditionally, the issue of the bundles of rights has led to the fact that national distributors are the most involved when it comes to the whole windows and the whole chronology. So theatrical, DVD, VoD, TV, I will not go into all the details, but we have already two ways of dealing with these bundles of rights. That's what we have been observing at the observatory. Sometimes producer film agents might opt for going through the national distributors, and the national distributors might decide to go directly to the VoD platform, or they might themselves decide to go via the aggregators. So here we have a sort of what has been called co-opetition. So sometimes there is a competition between these two subjects, other times they decide to cooperate. What happens when there is a decision to hold back the VoD rights? Then the situation changes a bit. You have the national distributors, which is now in a little bit gray, because they deal with the rest of the rights, so the bundle. But the VoDs are sometimes handled by the producers, film agents on their own, other times via the aggregators. So this is an emerging way of deciding to deal with these rights, where again, the aggregators can sometimes be a partner, other times it can be a real competitor. But what happens when we have films that, as we have seen, don't go to theatrical release? Then we might have the idea of having only the aggregator or the producer going directly to the VoD platform to sell the rights in countries that are different from the one where the film was released in the cinemas. The idea here is to make film travel. This responds to the digital single market strategy. The online circulation of the works would mean to allow them access online in the platforms that are available Europe-wide, but this is not always part of the traditional business of the national distributors. So here, the aggregators, I think that is at least what we have seen from these emerging models, are the ones that can step in with new types of knowledge. Some commentators also speak about Uberization of the market, which is, doesn't maybe sound that nicely, but it indeed reflects the idea of allowing a direct relationship with, in this case, the end destination of the works, which is the VoD platform. When it comes to the rules, these are very hot months when it comes to news from Brussels, and there is a little bit for everyone. There is something for the VoD providers, and then this leads me to the Audiovisual Media Services Directive. We have something for the end users, and this makes me talk about the so-called SATCAB regulation and the portability issues. And we have something for the rights holders, and that's the part of the copyright package and the mechanisms that are being introduced. And I would like just to give you a short guidance into this world, which is quite complex, but I think it's important not to lose insight that they all belong together. It's really a puzzle. I heard this word in the first panel discussion. I think this is the mosaic. The puzzle is also, it's not only from the market point of view, but maybe even more than ever from the regulatory point of view. So we'll just briefly start with the idea of that is behind. So this we all know. What is behind the digital single market strategy? So growth, circulation, better access. And these different pieces of legislation, they are meant to respond to these needs of the DSM package. To start with the VoD part, we are really talking about hot news. Yesterday, the European Parliament gave basically green light for the negotiations. So apparently this will lead already before summer break to the start of the trialogue. The 23rd of May will probably be the date of the general approach. So we are talking about something that is happening here and now. You see, I've still put 20%, but today I can maybe even start to put 30%. That is what the Parliament has been proposing when it comes to the share of the catalogue, so the presence of the work. Another issue is the one on visibility, the prominence part. This is, of course, crucial when it comes to the smaller works, maybe those works that the aggregators are able to put in the catalogue. If they are not made visible, it is not particularly likely that they might be accessed by people. And then we have the financial obligations. The latest news are that they might probably also be concerning the linear broadcasters, so not only the on-demand providers, and here we're talking about the financial contributions to the funds. So this is also something that is happening here and now, and it might indeed be good news for the film producers. Maybe the VoD platforms are not that happy, but this responds, of course, to the idea of adjusting the level playing field. When it comes to the functioning of the licenses, then we should talk about the copyright package. The copyright package has several rules. I have left on purpose out Article 13, which concerns the elephant in the room, the pirates, let's say, so the mechanisms for the enforcement, because I would really like to focus only on those rules that are aimed at bettering the functioning on the licensing systems. So the first one is concerning the negotiation mechanisms. Here the first issue is, and it has been mentioned already in this first panel session, transparency. This has been recognized by the new Article 14 as an accompanying measure to the negotiation mechanisms. For Article 10 and the Recital 30, which should be read together, they concern the establishment and the setup of a new mediator, so to say, this impartial body which member states will be obliged to set up in order to assist rights holders in the negotiation mechanisms. It's quite challenging to see how this will turn out in practice, because there is no indication to the member states on how this will have to be done. This is part of course, of the freedom of the members. The important thing is the requirement of impartiality. So it is likely that, of course, this might be an administrative body and not set up by the professionals. When it comes to the mechanisms as to the negotiations, the first commandment is the one on transparency. What is quite striking is that aggregators are not on board. So these transparency obligations for the moment, as they read in the formulation, is that they concern the authors, the performers, and the platforms where the works have to be shown. So this will then be interesting to see in the following part of the discussion. So transparency, first step, but that's enough. That's not enough. There might be some disproportionate relationships, the so-called value gap. And Article 15 intervenes here with some contract adjustment mechanisms to allow for the request of renegotiating in case there are unfair and disproportionate discrepancies. It's clear that the negotiation power of the different subjects might vary a lot, but at least this is something that is for the first time mentioned in the directive, together with Article 16 dispute resolution mechanism, which has been set up also to save time. Here we know more than ever how important time is. Piracy plays a lot on the issue of time, so this is exactly one of the main weaknesses of the system. Last, the access part. So we have seen transparency, the availability of the works, they are licensed, they are available, they must also be accessible. That's the third part of the leg of the digital single market strategy. And here we move into the regulation on the so-called SATCAB regulation, which is of course not its correct name. It concerns the retransmission of TV programs, the so-called ancillary services, and the geo-blocking regulation. The geo-blocking regulation and the portability regulations have been part, I think they are here, yes, I've changed the order. The geo-blocking is less relevant because audiovisual media services, they are left out of the scope. But when it comes to the regulation on portability, this is of course of major importance. It has been now adopted formally by the Parliament. This has also happened yesterday, so we're really talking about fresh news here. So it's now just a matter of a short time before it comes in the official journal for publication. Here, the issue concerns, of course, only the paid services, so it's just a part of our chain during the temporary presence abroad. But what is probably the hottest topic at the moment, and with this I will conclude and leave over to Mike again to see how the reaction from the panelists may be, is the issue of the accessibility via the clearance of rights that was foreseen by the so-called SATCAB regulation, which is being discussed. This is at a much earlier stage in the process. And here there are two main key findings that we should take with us. The first one concerns the country of origin, which is of course making many reactions quite strong. How is this going to impact on territoriality? Clearance of rights when it comes to ancillary services. And then second question, what are these ancillary services? On this there is also not that much clarity. We know from the directive that it is, that from the regulation, that will be catch-up services and live streaming, but again, what is a catch-up service is not defined, and we have seen at the observatory by doing some first exercises that these vary a lot from platform to platform. And the second part concerns the mandatory collective management issue for the clearance of rights when they will be retransmitted over closed networks. And here we are talking about third-party networks for the own produced content for the broadcasters. Now, how this will impact on the VoD rights distribution chain, I think, is the main question, and that is why I wanted to combine a graphical representation of the different actors with the rules that are in the next years going to have an impact on them. And I leave this question to you, Mike, and to the panelists. Thank you.
We're going to broaden this ever so slightly, I think, and we've got very little time here. We've turned the heat up to Fitzcarraldo, so you'll want to get the hell out of here at some point. But I think that I want to look also where this is a very Anglo-Saxon thing, so you'll apologise for this, but there is the regulatory element, and then there's the market element as well, which I think we're bringing into demand, the demand situation, because we're really looking at what's going to drive this next thing, what's going to make this thing work. Marco, coming to you, it does strike me, when you see the way that those regulations are all coming in, the complexity and the way they're doing it, it does seem like we're trying to regulate ourselves back to the status quo ante, in as much as we're trying to make something so it feels more like the old industry, so the whole value chain stays in place. I wonder if this is a workable model over the long run.
We have just a few minutes, but first off, I'm told the air condition is apparently a maximum, so enjoy this breath of fresh air. Second of all, when I hear about the CEO, maybe it's the temperature here, it starts driving me crazy, because one thing that you said that is very interesting, and it leads me to speaking about these other things, is exclusivity. You have in a lot of territories non-exclusive deals for the subscription video on demand platform or VOD and exclusive deal. Now, I'm not sure about some other smaller territories. Generally speaking, if a deal is non-exclusive, the money is just a tiny fraction of what you would get on an exclusivity deal. So this is very important, because we have reiterated over and over how our business centers around exclusive territorial exclusivity. So we do not want to have the message conveyed that it's about the same. So whether it's exclusive or non-exclusive, you're still going to find the money to create your product. Because before all this distribution, you need to have found the money to produce your film or TV series. Otherwise, all this is a beautiful system without product, except product that has already been financed thanks to the strength of other markets. And when we saw the uptick in the gross box office in the last couple of years, that doesn't come from here, it comes from China. We all know that. You know? So you have, now China were being worth 25% of the budget of a big film, and Italy and the rest of Europe is worth a tiny fraction of that. So we have to make, and we have tried to, and we are still engaged in speaking with the Commission, and explaining that if they have a different business model, that is not centered around territorial exclusivity, that's a fantastic news. A better news now would be to have air conditioning, but a new business model would also be good, second best. However, they have never come up with it. So we really wonder, you know, what's behind that? And all the audiovisual sector, we have signed as the European Producers Guild letter along with other 400, so we were 411, so we were other 410 entities. The whole industry is against this country of origin principle, except for some, not all of them, public broadcasters, they have a different motivation, unclear motivation. Let's not get into that. But it really deals with the things that we said about the subscription video demand. So what we said earlier, consumers want to watch or now have a habit to watch things when they want on the internet. So all broadcasters, all entities converge there. So even the public broadcasters, they don't want to be left out. They don't want to be seen, rightly so, as the entity of the past. So they want to be present there. They want to make sure that their audience also finds their product there. However, if you have this ancillary, so-called ancillary, catch-up, expanded from 2 points of view. Geographically, which the unbelievable country of origin principle would allow, meaning that they can do cross-border dissemination of certain products, even if they have cleared the rights only in their home country. And if they do it chronologically or temporarily, meaning that they can extend the catch-up to a point where it collides with other forms of exploitation, namely subscription video demand. Basically, you have a conflict where public broadcasters or other entities have maybe expanded their position and achieved certain results, but who pays for it? The rights holders, but eventually the consumers, because at the end, the consumers, what do they want? They want to have, they want to find projects, they want to find films and series. If you don't have this series, so it really revolves around the same thing. I mean, the rights, the entities that are come to play have now, or there are so many. I mean, it was very interesting that the different definitions of video on demand. There are so many now, you know. But if you basically push the catch-up so much that it becomes a free video on demand, if you have free video on demand, you're not going to sell your film or series to a subscription video on demand because they don't have exclusivity. Go tell European Commission.
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm sure I'll get a few applause. I know. I think half the audience, unfortunately, has died, so that's a shame. You would have got more applause otherwise. But I think that I think the point you're making, though, is a big one, which is was twofold. One is that these are different beasts, that actually they are coming in, and we do actually have to think about how we're going to deal with them, because they deal on a different dynamic. Their expectations and their growth platforms were formed in the United States, and they have their own kind of views. The second thing is, I think the point you're making that I don't think Europe makes as well as it might do, which is the argument of on-demand platforms is you've got to allow the consumer to have their choice. But and if they can't get their European film on their VoD platform, that's not fair. But the point you're making is, if you mess up any more the system, or you give way to the system, there won't be any European films being made for them to see in the first place.
Exactly. I'm sorry, just still a few more minutes. And this happens right when Europe is really coming together from many different territories.
Not us, though.
Well, it's not done yet. Let's not be hopeless. Air conditioning, hopeless. Brexit, we don't know. But the thing is that you see now focus on Italy TV drama, German TV drama, French. Let's not speak about the Nordic. They've been hip and cool for over 10 years. So we want to make sure that now that we're able to create this great film, I would say mostly TV series, that we don't have a structure, regulatory structure that actually hinders us, creates an obstacles. And whereas in America, where they use geo-blocking freely, by the way, even if it's a total single market, they use because geo-blocking is a tool, it's not, you don't have to call the exorcist when you hear geo-blocking, it's just a tool. It's just, you have a car, you have the handbrake, that's a tool. You don't have to hate the handbrake, because at some point it becomes useful. And similarly, some would say to air conditioning. Sorry about that.
Yeah. I think we get the general gist of this. But the point you're making is big. That it does look like a complex thing, and there is that joke of in France, if it moves, we tax it, and if it keeps moving, we regulate it. And there is that kind of feeling that there's. But what you're saying is that actually what we're doing here is there are on-demand markets that could build. There are ways that we could build these things, and it may necessarily be complicated and difficult at the start, but actually there is the possibility of building VoD because the demand is still there, but you don't want to be killing the demand at this stage. Wendy, maybe you could give your thoughts.
Well, the only angle I wanted to put color on with your comment was in terms of the valuation of the different windows, the two SVODs, the AdVOD and free. Don't combine free catch up with AdVOD. They're separate financial windows, which is often overlooked, but I think the non-exclusivity should, as a rule of thumb with pay TV, be only half or a third, at worst, of the regular exclusive pay. So if people are dealing differently than that, or at lower rates, it might be because the films that we are selling or buying are older. And I think a key here is how old is the film? If it's 2 to 5 years old, it's in the sweet spot for SVOD. If it's older than that, it falls into the sitting on a shelf, not being sold anyway category, at which point you just have extra revenue from selling to second and third window SVOD and AdVOD. And I think we shouldn't mix a new film in premier first run pay competition with the sudden new birth of services that will buy stuff that's sitting on a shelf that we've forgotten about. And I think that lifts the pie as well if it's allowed. If these rules block you, then you lose that ability.
Yeah, you say we shouldn't, but the reality is that is how Netflix and Amazon, their model. How many people here have a Netflix account? That's everyone. Well, everyone is still alive. There's different stuff. But the truth is, Netflix. What we like about Netflix is probably most people here have taken it for the exclusive, probably TV content, the exclusive content that's immediate. What you're doing here is suggesting a pattern where we have old and new and this kind of different kind of on-demand platforms. But the reality is that is their model, and their model, if it's going to expand, is increasingly going to be difficult to fit in with the kind of approach that we take at the moment. And I think what we're hearing so far is, well, you don't just let that happen and give way. You actually have some interest yourselves. Maybe come to Hami at the end there. From your point of view, when you look at regulation, you look at what is it that you want? What is it that you think is going to help the legal platforms, the VoD platforms grow?
As a cinephile or as the owner of a VoD on the VoD platform, because it's different. Yeah. I think since Spain is a completely different market than France or UK or Italy, because of the piracy of this so-called elephant in the room, we live in a digital single market, at least in Spain. So all the films are available. All films are available at one click distance. So this is one problem. Second problem is 78% of European cinema, 78%, only gets distribution in 2 countries, in 2 territories in the UA. So this is another problem. If I live in, I'm a Spanish guy who I live in, let's say, Poland, I couldn't have access to any Spanish films in a legal way. So we need to find different solutions for that people. Why not? This is it's an open question. Probably an European platform, which like filming on all the different territories, could be a solution. Why not? But it's not. I think in 1 year, 1 year and a half, we won't see it.
Yeah, but those, I mean, getting back to Netflix and Amazon, you know, we talk about the numbers here, but you just look here, people are using Netflix. When you look at those figures on how much of the internet, how much of the bandwidth is being used up by Netflix, how much here the films from Amazon and Netflix are now making an impact. Just from the point of view of understanding their position, when you look at films here that are in competition, and they're saying, are you telling us we have funded these films, but we're going to need to wait 36 months before they can be seen on our own platforms? You can understand why those kind of situations are difficult. And if there was a European platform that did it, and a European platform came in and was commissioning on a regular basis, was funding European films that they couldn't show on their platforms for that amount of time, would there not be a similar issue here as well? It's just, I'm trying to work out how the market forces and the regulation can come crashing into each other.
No, basically, I would say that 90% of the films that we released weekly are available on VoD and VoD as well.
Yeah.
We run an online film festival, and half of the films are available on VoD and VoD during the festival, during 1 month. Why? Because it's the only way to increase and attract the audience in Spain. Yeah. Once again, it's different in Spain than UK and in France and the French market. But
no, I mean in Spain, you know, they're on pirate sites before they've been finished, so it's a big deal there. And I understand what you're saying when it's already there. Maybe we could move to Tina. I mean, what we're talking about here is trying to find a balance between market and regulation. And it seems to me it is complex, because I think we think, and this is the point Marco was making, that when you bring SVOD into the market, it's just another ancillary platform that's going to replace DVD. And what it is a whole different entity with a whole different dynamic. I wonder from your point of view.
And everything is depending on the country. Like the arrival of the majors, they are also established in so many countries, and there's still some countries where they're not working. There are countries where local platforms have been taking up the competition, but again, it's about exploiting each window. It's not about going from theatrical to AVOD. You have to exploit each window. It's the holdbacks that are getting shorter. I think the model of the presentation before about being able to take your services when you go on a short travel or when you're studying abroad, it's coming in 2018, and that's not a problem at all. It's all about localization, being available on all European platforms. It's also about localization. Who's going to pay for it? Because in most cases it doesn't make sense for smaller European films. It's either the risk of the producer or the rights holder or the sales agent or the aggregator. No one wants to take that cost, because the uncertainty about recouping is too big. And then there was the whole model about the platforms only charging 20%. That's how I understood it. They will just figure out a different way to make up for that rule or that regulation. But I think that if there's a percentage of their content that has to be European, then it would work. But otherwise they just select. And then your film will never be sold. And when we sell non-exclusive, it's about doing multiple deals. It's not about doing one deal, because then we will wait for the right timing and do the exclusive deal, but it's about multiple deal across, multiple non-exclusive deals, but exclusive against a language or exclusive against a platform, where you can still do a distribution deal with an all rights distributor, but then at a different time you can do the non-exclusive pay TV deal or a non-exclusive SVOD deal. And that can be platforms that cover all of Europe, but it can also be outside Europe, but it's about the timing and the timeline. So our job is becoming much more about the whole puzzle and the rights coordination than the timing of each specific window, but across countries.
Right, this is, sorry, Wendy, you wanted to make a point?
Just to say, building on that point, it's an era, we haven't mentioned much of it, hybrid distribution, where you can deliberately work the overlaps, a sales agent working with a digital agent, together releasing selectively for the film. In this country, we do a traditional approach. In this one, we go to ad VoD first and then build a cinema audience. So you need that flexibility, and if it's over-regulated, you can't tailor it to the films. The second part that's connected to hybrid distribution is talking about the audience's interest, which the SVODs do. They look at what the audiences want to watch, which is also pirate sites. So some SVODs are using pirate sites as a way to improve their marketing, finding out that in Romania, horror films are working really well, so then you can launch a commercial service in that region, like actually taking a grain of salt, of course, but looking at pirate audiences and then finding ways to work them into your site.
Can I just say, in terms of the different strategies, we're working with local rights holders where we are using free TV in some cases to promote TVOD. I think TVOD is growing in most of the countries where we're working, but it's again about, for some specific films, like a horror film, you can do exclusive on one platform because they have that niche audience. You can also do after theatrical release, you can use free TV with one screening to promote the EST and TVOD. In some cases, EST and TVOD should be released at the same time. In other cases, it makes sense to do early EST, especially for family films. But also, the audience will know that 1 or 2 weeks after or 30 days after, you can actually rent it. So if you want to wait, that's fine. But otherwise, you pay for it now and you pay full price. Or you use theatrical VOD which will be a completely different price. But I'm sure that it will generate it's about making it available at the time where it's not possible for you to see in the cinemas, and that can be families, but at least they will pay for it, and they will pay a bigger price in order to be able to see it at the same time as everyone at work or...
Right, let's nail this point, because I think Marco kind of raised it at the start, is that the idea here that I think is being put out is that there's the free system of choice, which is being offered on one side from Netflix and Amazon, and then there's the horrors of regulation, which is going to spoil this market. But actually what you're saying, all of you, is there's tons of flexibility within a system that keeps territoriality and keeps some of those elements. Windows may be flexible, that's a discussion maybe, but the reality of the territorial sales, which is at the heart of the system of funding films in Europe, because it's not the same as the States, you may find ways of meeting demand and matching demand, and it actually is more flexible. You're finding new ways to get into that market. You're finding new systems of rights. You're finding new approaches. So in a sense, what you're arguing is that it's got to be all the market is a rather monolithic and even old-fashioned view compared to if we keep our system here, we find new ways of making this happen. Is that broadly the point?
Yes, and I think also in most cases where there's been tests for day-and-date releases on theatrical VOD, pay TV, it's when the theatrical distributor, the VOD platform, the sales agents, the producer can agree, it's usually when they do not believe in the film. And then they do the day-and-date release, and the numbers turns out bad, and everyone is a little afraid, and so it's all about the coordination and working across all cinema owners with the producers, but tests on bad films will not show great results.
No, you have to test the best ones, as they do in North America or sometimes in the UK. Putting your best stuff forward for a certain genre of film that does better when it begins on online. I mean, even BBC puts, in a television context, puts its own series up on VoD before its own premiere, Doctor Who. It's not out of generosity. They earn good money from that, and they reach a wider audience than the younger people not sitting at home watching BBC anymore. So this ability to flex and have hybrid approaches to widen your audience is something that we might lose if it's tightly regulated.
Yeah.
And then, sorry, the last thing.
Yeah, please do.
On a small documentary we had a few years ago, we did a release with the Sundance Film Festival and exclusive on iTunes. And that's just another way to take a small documentary and give it more attention and coordinate with Sundance Film Festival and iTunes to get huge attention. And it was on top 10 of documentaries in the US for 2 weeks. And then, you know, it disappears and you have to think creative to get it back on the front page. But at least it was a tiny Iranian documentary, and that was a way to prove it.
Well, Mark, let me just take that point from Mark, and then we'll open it up to questions. We've painted a picture of a system that seems to me you could keep a lot of those. There are some red lines for Europe. I'm not sure about all of those things. I think you're even suggesting that Windows is something which is going to change over time, and it has changed. You know, the windows are not monolithic in most countries. They've actually moved everywhere to the point they are now. But that's not necessarily the main thing. The main thing, it seems to me, you're saying is, once we know the shape of the market and that regulation is in place, there may be loads of different models in there. But it still comes down to being able to build demand. And the point you're making is a film that no one wants to watch. No one's going to watch on a VOD platform either. And that seems to me where we're coming down to distributors as well, that you're going to need to promote this stuff still. In that mosaic you're talking about, your job is more complex, but you've got to build that demand somewhere. And the bit I think we often forget when we're talking about VOD is the clue's in the title. It's got to be on demand. There has to be some demand in order for people to go there.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. That especially for European films, more for other type of titles which have like a global exposure, like some of the studio titles have big franchise, big exposure. If you look at the like for example, we do 30 films a year. Most of them like two-thirds are European or whatever. It's the investment we put into the rights, it's the investment we put into the marketing, the P&A, but it's also the investment we put into our people and the passion they have, that you suddenly can slowly build something. And like no film will work without that involvement. So going back to the European stuff we were talking about, I think the good things, and as you mentioned, Marco, a few more worrying things about the territoriality or whatever. The key issue for thinking about all these regulation is more to think of where do we think the market will be in 5 years. And if we think the market in 5 years will be, there'll be 2 or 3 SVOD players that will serve the cinemas, and that's it. There's just SVOD, that's one thing. If we think there'll be theatrical and SVOD, that's another thing. If we think there'll be theatrical and a mosaic, that's another thing. Or do we think we'll stick a bit to what we have now? We need to think of these different scenarios. But at this moment, there is not one that can replace the other. So we need to live in a period of flux. And I think what's very important about the European regulation, or any kind of regulation, is to build confidence, because we, for example, I'll just take the little example that that I have. We spend millions to get these rights. We spend millions to promote these films. If there's a bit of doubt, then suddenly you get shaky, and not only us, but the other 20, 30 distributors in the Benelux and then in every single country. And we're still, especially for European films, the go-to market of that space. So I think that's what very simple point. And I see already, for example, in Belgium, we have the French part of Belgium is very close to France. And if you would just know the issues we have at getting French TV channel broadcasting in Belgium, the holdbacks, the intricacy of all of that, we can quickly, if we don't get like a 2-week or a month's window of free TV before France, the local TV won't buy the film, and then we lose 20-25% of the investment we've done, boom, in one little go. And all that stuff about dissemination, about the territoriality is a big issue that we are confronted to daily in a way.
But what you're really talking about, we need some stability. The market needs stability in order to build all their flexible ideas and all the rest of it. We've got to get some of these things now down and say that's what the rules are, because that regulatory thing can't keep changing every 2 minutes in order to try and fix, touch the tiller and take you in different directions. You're saying, let us know where we are and we can start building business. And the second bit is the competitive environment. We don't know yet, but actually, I think you're suggesting that in Europe we could be severely disadvantaged if we are still messing around with the regulatory stuff and not knowing quite where we are, because Netflix and Amazon are absolutely clear about what they are. They're absolutely clear about what they're offering, and they're offering services, whether you're booing or not. We buy here right now as a matter of choice. So I think your argument is, get this thing down, get this thing sorted.
Well, and I think we shouldn't be too black and white also when we talk about Netflix and Amazon. I think there's been a lot of, I'm not going to talk about the air conditioning, but there's been like some heated stuff, not only now, but in the last few days. I think one thing which is important is, for example, and they may change in the next weeks or the next months or whatever, but if you look at the difference between Netflix and Amazon is still now a company that relies on the theatrical release, then it moves into an exclusive SVOD window, but a lot of the films they produce, we as Cinea, for example, we can buy it. We go to Film Nation or we go to a sales agent and we can buy Amazon Studio films because they believe in the theatrical release. So I think to Wendy's point is now we talk about these two, but I think over time, like in the supermarket, in the retail market, there is place for the big supermarket that is cheap, the big supermarket that is a bit nicer, the small little traiteur of this or that. You can have a mix of different SVOD offerings for different kind of audiences. You'll have a few mainstream ones, 2 or 3, and then the other ones. And in that sense, I think we should, there are also people, like all the SVOD players are also people that fund the cinema, so we shouldn't spit on the hand that feeds as well. And when I talk about that, I also talk about all the telcos, all the pay TV operator, all these people. So I think we have to be a bit calm about all these things. I think for me, one of the biggest issue is, like in Spain, is piracy. And if you look at the Netherlands, for example, it's quite a big thing. Out of a population of 17 million, you take 6.7 million households. According to our studies, there is a little under half that use a mix, almost 50-50 between streaming and torrent. Netflix has, according to different sources, between 1 and 1.5 million or whatever, and that's great. But piracy, I think harmonizing the way piracy is dealt with at a European level is quite an important thing. And I think now we see, for example, the UK has something more which is about blocking, which is about notifying, which is, the Motion Picture Association works with the telcos. That's quite good. Germany has another system. But I think for now, if you talk about confidence and investment, not only for us, but also all the SVOD players, I think piracy is one that we need to deal with. And that's also probably the most important thing is the consumers, because consumers also use it because it's easier and cheap. And I'm not saying that's the way forward, but we have to think about piracy as being probably the main thing we need to solve.
Okay, and that is obviously going to be a big part of this discussion as well. I think that it is worth making that point about Netflix and Amazon. That is quite important, but we are in a changing system. We are still in flux, as you said. I've got some breaking news. The air conditioning is broken. No shit, Sherlock. Okay, questions. We've got time for a couple of questions. One in the middle here. If we can zip the microphone down. Got one in the middle. We need these questions to be. Oh, well, we did have one in the front. We'll have that one next.
Okay. Hi, how are you? Fabio.
Hi, Fabio.
Good to see you again. Pricing strategy. Why we are not discussing pricing strategy and how does affect the pirates, SVOD, AVOD, on the TVOD level, for example. So why not be more aggressive in terms of a lower price?
Someone tell us that?
We coordinate the pricing with the distributors on the local market, and we do the non-exclusive. Now we're not talking about theatrical, but on each of the VoD platforms, we in our contracts we have to have the same pricing on all platforms. So we work on You cannot have a film at a lower price on iTunes than on Google. So it has to be the same. But then there is a pricing structure, and that's something you coordinate with your local distributor, and you do lower the price. But it's about timing. It can also be, for instance, the film where we did the free TV promotion to free TV to promote the TVOD. We had a lower price. It can be after a certain amount of time, or we do campaigns, or there's film of the week. There's many possibilities. But again, you have to have the same price on all platforms at the same time. So EST is the same price, TVOD is the same price. And then when the film is on SVOD, I would lower the price on TVOD. And if the film is on AVOD or FVOD, I would also lower the price.
Yeah, we didn't really get into pricing, and it seems to me that's one of the keys in territoriality as well, that actually building demand and growing that demand. Pricing seems to me a critical thing that we haven't really moved all that far on yet, but I think it's going to become a big issue. We had a question.
It's mainly to you, Michael, where you showed a lot of scepticism about regulation. And yet Germany has now a levy, so I should say who I am, Carol Tung, former MEP, chair of the European Coalitions for Cultural Diversity of Expression. Germany is now levying VOD services both inside their territory and those beaming from outside into Germany. And that money is going into the German film funds to fund German film. I'd just like your commentary on that, as other countries, Spain, Italy, France, Belgium, are doing the same, and whether we would ever think about that in the United Kingdom. And finally, on the territoriality of rights, going back to what Marco said, it is incredibly important that there is a huge lobby on members of the European Parliament, particularly from the new member states, where they are promoting an ending, as it were, of territoriality. So if you're from Poland or the Czech Republic or Slovakia or Slovenia, it's going to be incredibly important to lobby your government to keep the rules, as you've talked about, Michael, where they are now and not to change territoriality.
Okay, first question out of the way first. I'm from Birmingham. I was born with a look of scepticism on my face. And that was me. I wasn't giving my own personal view. I'm just merely trying to be the devil's advocate to put that point across. But if we, I think the broader point you're making is, look, this is the way that films get funded, and actually it is necessary for us, maybe, to make these points and to lobby quite hard. Maybe, Mark.
I totally agree. I think I'm not opposed. I don't think anybody here is opposed to regulation, but wrong regulation, yes, sure, we have to fight it. And I think that, again, a situation where a public broadcaster can disseminate can exploit certain product, certain film or TV series across border without having control, without having acquired the rights to those territories first, may, from the public broadcaster point of view, expand its audience. So from the rights holder's point of view, created an unbelievable damage, because you cannot then go co-produce your film or TV series with other territories, because each territory requires territorial exclusivity. So I think that this is really important, that regulation is good, that we have pragmatically engaged the Commission and with a lot of suggestions, etc. But I think that if you, when you hear certain statements, you understand there is a kind of ideological approach where there is this belief that whatever is on the internet has to be accessed by everybody without having paid a price for it, and this is maybe good remunerative from a political point of view, but it's going to be the disaster for the industry, because you eventually going to have a really hard time co-producing the best product across Europe.
I think just quickly on, I think when we were going around the panel, just sum that up, I think there are things that are red lines that we should go to the wall on, and there is lots of other regulation that we're getting very worked up about. And I think territoriality, I think, was the point. We're making anything that stops the funding of those films that actually would go on and drive those platforms. I think we're saying maybe get worked up about that more. In the answer to the UK thing, by the way, we'll be drifting drunkenly in the mid-Atlantic, beating each other up with cricket bats. That's what we're going to do, and looking enviously at our European cousins, maybe. But that's my face again. There was a point there.
Yeah, hi. As a producer, the concern is that the mosaic is so confusing that trying to finance a film and get any kind of estimates that can be relied upon for investors is going to become very difficult. Does anybody have any reassurance on that? Is there enough information emerging?
Yeah, Mark, you're a mosaic man.
I think, you know, like the way you typically finance a film, I mean, depending where you come from, but you will have a mix between, you know, soft money, real money, and then obviously signing a sales agent and having all the local countries giving you stuff. The sales agent will give you information, sometimes will probably gives you estimates that are a bit higher than what the market does, because, you know, you probably a few are pitching, so you probably have numbers that would be a bit higher. But otherwise, once you get into the discussion with the local distributors, they will have done their calculations, and we always plan it on, you know, we do per film a calculation that brings us over the period of the film, and then, you know, there's an amount that comes up, and that's the amount we're comfortable buying it for. But that's, you know, that's obviously, you know, like a lengthy process before you get all that information.
I recognise all that, obviously, but my point is, as things become so confusing and uncertain, are the sales agents and the local distributors going to have the information they need to get a proper grip to give reasonably firm estimates in this current environment?
I think it's less easy than it was 3, 4, 5 years ago, but you will still get them at some point, because we at some point will get the cash out. So we'll need to make our calculations. But I agree, it's not always easy, and for you there's also now the choice whether you go with the classic route, or you do a deal whereby you keep the local rights or something like that, and you sell worldwide to, you know, like a big SVOD player.
I think you made the point really well earlier. I think other people in the panel were making the point, but you're right. A mosaic of going to the bank with, here's a set of very complex ideas is more difficult when you're trying to get funding than it is than if you're just going in with a much clearer thing. And we understand knowledge was one of the big underlying bits of this, isn't it? If we need to know more. Last question, I think. Sorry, over here.
Thanks. All very interesting. John Barnett's my name, from New Zealand. I'm involved in the platform that provides streaming for Sanando, AFM, South by Southwest, Hawaii Film Festival, Talon, Black Nights, and a number of others. We have just developed and are ready to roll on a premium video on-demand system, which would be operated solely through the exhibitor sites. The exhibitor and distributor can determine whether they want to go day and date, 4 days later, a week later, or the week after. But if you want to book, you can go and buy a picture ticket at $15, or a stream at $20, $35, $30, and the revenue is with the exhibitor to be split with the distributor on the basis that they've set their normal terms up.
Well, congratulations, you've come all the way to the other side of the world and got an advert in, so I think that's good work. I think that just very, very broadly, I think we were talking here about the emerging system, and actually you're quite right, exhibition is also, there are exhibitors, particularly where distributors are exhibitors as well, where these things are happening. Wendy, maybe just very last word, and then we need to sum up. Maybe somebody said what needs saying. I think so. Right, okay. So, look, if we sum up, this was nearly the first naked panel, which, believe me, would not have been the best thing in the world. But I think that I'm not wishing to extend the air conditioning metaphor. It does feel at the moment we are in a place where a lot of things are in flux still. I think we're having a discussion at a stage that we couldn't have had a year ago, but will be very different than the discussion we're having next year. But I think we began to see underlying this a sense of direction. One is that I think that the regulatory framework needs to be in place, and we need to know where those lines are going to be. Those red lines are we're not going to go over, and make sure that everyone understands that. And I think if Netflix and Amazon and whoever else, the reality is there is a hell of a lot of people with money in territories in Europe that I think there will be more flexibility than I think we imagine sometimes. There'll be ways around these things. I think that what we heard from Marco in particular was that we need to protect, if we believe in VOD, we need to make sure we can still make the films that populate those VOD platforms. And we won't be seeing films on VOD making an impact unless we got the money to finance them in the first place. So I think the argument there is about territoriality. I think that the argument we've been hearing a bit is about also, there is actually in this system, it's not yet in place. Producers don't yet quite know in this mosaic system we've got. There is clearly a way of making some money, and people are doing it right now. They're doing their mosaic, they're doing their little bit of VOD, they're doing their exclusive, their non-exclusive deals. But the sooner we get to a system where that becomes stable, that a producer can take to the bank, then the clearer the opportunities are to actually make this pie work for you. And I think we're still some way off that position. I think some of that is also about obligation, I think, on rights holders and content owners to say, look, I need to work out this system too. I have responsibilities. I need to make sure that the way we market films, the way we release films, the way that we approach films is probably going to need to be different. And that may have an impact on the value chain over the long run. Although at the moment, cinema is clearly the way in to VOD channels too, and I don't think anyone was disagreeing with that. The relation between cinema and those other channels can be changing in all kinds of ways, and that might mean changing windows, or it might mean, as in the our New Zealand friend over there was pointing out, that there might be that actually we have this very, very mixed system where exhibitors are even involved in the system. So where we have a stake in on demand, there are more reasons for us to get involved and to be flexible and to change things. But the key thing I think I'll just leave you with is the idea that's coming across here at the end of this is we can put all these systems in place, but a bad film on a VOD platform, however prominent, is not going to get watched. And it seems to me what we need is a system of stability in filmmaking. We need that quality, we need that belief and that in our own work that makes people want this stuff. Because if there is no demand, there is no on-demand. And I think we need to make sure that those two things don't disappear. Regulation doesn't make people watch films, but it might give the situations where we can make films that we want to watch. Don't know if that makes sense because it's so bloody hot, but go out there, fresh air. Thanks for coming.